Before we open today's valve and let this episode flow, quick sprinkler shout out.
The Fire Sprinkler Inspection, Testing, and Maintenance Certificate Program is coming in hot June 9th through the 11th.
It's 3 fully charged days at the AFSA Fire Sprinkler Lab in Richardson, Texas, built in collaboration with the Oklahoma State University.
There's no dry training here. You're tripping valves, flowing hydrants, testing pumps, and soaking up NFPA 25 knowledge the hands-on way.
You'll walk away with 2.4 CEUs, a solid certificate, and skills that actually hold water.
Hit the link in the description to learn more. Keep an eye out for the AFSA marketing for sprinkler info into your feed.
Now let's get this episode flowing.
Welcome to the K-Factor podcast, where we turn up the heat on all things fire protection. Brought to you by the American Fire Sprinkler Association, this podcast sparks conversations about the latest technology, trends, and tools shaping the industry. Join the AFSA tech team as we fan the flames of innovation in fire safety.
Welcome to another episode of the K-Factor podcast. We are here with El Presidente Bob Caputo. Welcome.
Good morning.
And he is going to do a remix over the beat of our K-Factor theme song. Appreciate your time, Bob. Thanks for being on again.
Thanks for having me.
So this is kind of an interesting one, or at least an interesting topic that we're going to cover. And I guess I want to know what your experience is with your career and continuing learning, and if you've stopped learning.
So, interesting question. I personally don't think that anybody in any field, technical field, medical field, you cannot ever stop learning. I'll call it climbing stairs. You get to a plateau and you get in a comfort zone, so you stop climbing, you stop learning. And the technology, the information, the experience all passes you by, and you become less relevant in your industry. In our industry, we learn more from negative events than we learn, just from codes and standards. In fact, a lot of the codes and standards are driven by the learning experience of simple things. When we think back to the Iroquois Theater fire, when the doors at that theater opened inward and people couldn't get out and more people perished, we passed building code laws that say doors now have to open out so that people can egress without that complicating factor of inward opening doors. Things as simple as that make the example of having to learn from experience. I will say that my grandmother used to be fond of saying that good judgment is the result of experience, and experience is the result of bad judgment. You can never, ever stop learning and growing. I think once you think you know it all, probably time for outfitting yourself for a coffin.
So how much of a role do you think that plays, I guess, with the companies? I mean, I think some of the issue that I see sometimes is that you have your 20 or 30 year seasoned veteran, pardon me, go in and continuing education sometimes could be like, I don't know my job. I've been doing this 25 years. What do you think about the organization with that situation, or that type of inspector? And we're going to pick on inspectors. You could probably tie this into anything, right?
Sure. So what's kind of funny about that is it's kind of a generational shift in dynamics. If you think back in the 50s, 60s, maybe even into the 70s, there was this thought process that the older, more experienced worker knew what there was to know, and they would train that younger, lesser experienced person. But it was also an era where you did research or studied past history. When I was a kid, we had the Britannica encyclopedias, okay? And if you had to do a report, you went and read something that it was in a book that spoke to historical events, but the books themselves were already 10 years old or 5 years old or maybe even older. The advent of technology with desktop computers and certainly with the internet put information at your fingertips so that the young worker probably came in with the ability to attain more current active knowledge and maybe put them on an even playing field. So when it comes to being an inspector, or let's go back to being a pipe fitter, whether you're a sprinkler fitter, plumber, doesn't matter what kind of pipe we're talking about, but it became a shorter learning track. So everything has a bell curve to it, and everything can get like bread. Bread's awesome until it goes stale.
And it's croutons.
Then it's, well, maybe then it's penicillin with mold. But the reality of that is that everything gets old. So could you spend 30 years of a career sticking pipe in the hole and turning it to the right and be satisfied? And for some people, that's a great career. It pays the bills, it puts their kids through college, allows them to own a home, a boat, second home, or whatever that happens to be for the individual. But the world's become a much smaller place. Information is much more rapid. The rate of change of technology has become so rapid that I hate purchasing a computer, because by the time I get it to the office and open the box, there's a better, newer one on the shelf. So I'm not sure all of that's good, but what I'm getting to is it changes the respect level for the legacy worker who's gained their experience through actual tactile dealing with customers, making mistakes, learning from the mistakes, becoming a better communicator, learning from people's mistakes of how not to cause water damage claims, not opening a valve and washing out somebody's brand new pine straw or bark chips that they just did a beautification project around their building.
Or exit corridor.
So the inspector shows up, opening an inspector's test valve or a main drain valve and washes all that stuff out without thinking until that owner expresses their displeasure, with the service they received. All that experience develops a better inspector. So the new learner might come into the job and know the technical aspects, but not the visceral aspects of the job, that, what it feels like. And how do I avoid pulling a live sprinkler head, or whatever those factors might be that come back to the judgments, the result of experience. And I think a new learner does have at their fingertips a lot of technical information, but they're not as seasoned as that person who's got 10, 15, 20 years on the job learning from experience.
So, Bob, you mentioned this bell curve, right? And so very early on in your career, you're very early in that bell curve, and your growth of learning is fairly steep. You're gaining a lot of knowledge fairly quickly, right? You're learning the technical aspect. You're learning the soft skills. You're learning all of the intangibles that you potentially can't get out of a book, right? But at some point, you become fairly proficient. You're kind of hitting your stride in your career. You're probably near the top of that bell curve. At some point, you're going to start going down that backside of the bell curve where you have a lot of the technical knowledge, the technical know-how. You've gained a lot of those soft skills, interacting with people. You've developed through experience kind of the things you should and shouldn't do. But there's still the need for that person at that point in their career to continue learning. But coming down the backside of that bell curve becomes increasingly more difficult. So for them to continue learning, it's not as simple as I'm going to go sit through a 1-hour continuing education seminar, because a lot of the material may be repetitive. They may already know. So what would you say to the people that are at that point where they're having that extra struggle to gain those extra knowledge nuggets? What advice do you have for them to kind of continue developing in their career and not kind of stagnate, thinking, hey, I've got it all. Every seminar I go to, it's mostly repetitive.
Right. So a lot of people do show up for seminars because they need CEUs. I present a lot of seminars, both for AFSA and NFPA. And I start by telling people that if you are only here for CEUs and you don't care what I have to say, then please don't snore. The important thing to understand about our industry, and let's talk specifically about inspection, testing, and maintenance, because I really like to focus this conversation on inspection, testing, and maintenance issues I think are critically important. So, first of all, I think it's human nature to get complacent with repetitive tasks. So one of the jobs of leadership really is to continue to motivate people so that it doesn't become mundane or disinteresting, or that people don't want to continue to learn. The NFPA standards, all of the NFPA standards we deal with, have a 3-year code cycle. And so for inspectors, it's critically important that they stay ahead of and aware of the changes, both in frequencies or in testing and inspection items or functions, because we want those systems to work as intended when a fire occurs. There's no question that that's critically important. And so one of the things that I learned in my previous role as a VP of training in a large organization that did a lot of inspection and testing, in fact, that's their primary focus, we would bring inspectors in and train them literally from scratch in a 2-year program and teach them NFPA 25 cover to cover, NFPA 72, Chapter 14, all of the requirements for handheld extinguishers and fire suppression systems, all of the things that have to do with fire and life safety within a building, an existing building. And so after a 2-year classroom training program, sandwiched with on-the-job training, we would develop inspectors who had maybe never been fitters or fire alarm technicians. We were very successful in doing that. The problem we discovered very shortly into the process, maybe 6 or 8 months into the development of that training program, was that when they were on the OJT piece, the legacy inspectors would tell them something different than we were teaching them in the classroom. We were teaching them specifics about dealing with problem customers or problem situations. We would teach them about scheduling and the importance of planning a route, the importance of being thorough and documenting deficiencies or discrepancies, so that both the goal of doing inspections in a for-profit organization isn't just to make money doing the inspection, of course. It's to hopefully turn inspection dollars into repair dollars. But more importantly, there's a need to protect the company from liability. So once you put a tag on a system that you didn't design and didn't install, in a lot of ways, you've kind of adopted the liability of, hey, if something goes wrong with this particular system and it doesn't function as intended in a fire and there's a loss, the insurance company of the owner isn't just going to pay the loss. They're going to subrogate against anybody whose name's on that system or whoever the last person who touched it, inspected it, tested it, whatever those functions might be. So it's critically important that we document everything that we find, the recommendations that we make, and that we ensure that those recommendations are aligned with the proper standard, whether it's NFPA 25 for water-based systems or other types of systems. But not only that we document observations that may be beneficial to the owner of the system, but outside of the scope of one of the standards, to protect the company against liability, so that the inspector doesn't end up sitting in a room full of attorneys being interviewed about why a valve was shut during a fire when, hey, you did the last inspection, could you have left the valve closed? There's a lot more to learning to be an inspector than being able to read NFPA 25.
Do you think that the industry underestimates the responsibility of an inspector?
I think most companies take a lot for granted until they end up in a lawsuit. So I think it's critically important for us as an association to continue the training on into infinity. I mean, I think we have a critical role to make sure that all of our members are aware of their potential liability. I have an article that's coming in the next Sprinkler Age magazine that's entitled, "Do you know what your inspectors are actually doing?" And the reason I'm asking that question is because I see inspectors, I hear from inspectors, testers, that hey, the owner doesn't want to hear about these deficiencies, so I don't write them up. Whether it's painted sprinklers or bent sprinkler deflectors or, corrosion in a parking garage. Corrosion's a big issue. It's one of the things we're looking for. And, I'll just say this. Most people go to the doctor once a year for a physical checkup. And the doctor generally will, take some blood pressure, take a few samples, do a few tests. And if nothing's wrong, they see you next year. We'll do it again. But if they find some anomalies, they'll send you for more tests and maybe be a little more invasive and take a little more of your time. I look at inspection and testing of fire protection systems in the same way. We come out at least once a year and we look at things. And if we see problems, they can be cured if we find them early enough. But if we wait until the corrosion is so bad that a pipe bursts and the pump kicks on and we flood a building, now that's a catastrophic event and it's an expensive event. So inspectors need to understand that they shouldn't look past what they think are little things, that they should document all the things that they find, even if they think they're minuscule or not of interest to the owner. I don't think the owners, I've met owners of buildings who didn't know they had a fire sprinkler system. It's critical for us as an industry, at least in my opinion, to tell the owner more than they want to hear. Whether they like it or they don't, whether they act on it or they don't. By documenting and making sure the owner sees that documentation, if they choose to ignore it, their peril. But at least if I'm involved in a lawsuit, I can defend that lawsuit by documenting that I share the information and the potential problem related with it to that owner.
So I think there's a lot of inspectors out there that potentially don't understand for a variety of reasons, right? It might be a lack of training, it's not been explained to them, they haven't sat down with legal counsel for their company, whatever, but they don't understand that the amount of liability and how much liability we're taking on in simple decisions such as, hey, I'm going to not write this up because I've written it up for the last 10 years. They haven't done anything about it. I'm just going to stop writing it up. The impact that could have. But I also feel like there has been, outside of the formal discussions we have in the classroom, I don't know if it comes up enough. So where would you point somebody to go educate themselves on the liabilities and how that kind of shifts and what liabilities they're potentially taking on or not taking on, depending on the decisions they make, other than getting themselves in a lawsuit, sitting down in a room full of lawyers and having a really unfun day?
Yeah. So
the oh crap thought.
Yeah.
So what's interesting, I think, about that is it has to be painful to be impactful in the learning experience. So I'm really fond of, well, I think the problem, the heart of the problem, the root of the problem is that traditionally in our industry, we've taken pipe fitters and told them to go inspect something. Hey, if you put it in, you must know how to do the inspection. And I think that's predominantly wrong because, and especially because, inspection and testing is a specialty thing. And I don't believe that a fitter who knows how to install something knows how to test and inspect it. And I'll use as an example, I drive an F-150. Ford Motor is not paying
sorry.
me. Well, Ford Motor's not paying me for this plug, but I'm going to say this.
We could use a sponsorship, though.
There's an assembly plant where they built my F-150, which, by the way, Josh, is the most purchased pickup truck in America.
For fraternity kids.
Pretty sure it's also the most stolen, but you know.
That could be as well. But regardless, when they manufacture that truck or any other truck, or any other vehicle for that matter, there's an assembly line. And people work on the assembly line. And the guy who put the quarter panels or the bed on my truck isn't qualified to be my mechanic. I'm not going to take, because you participated in building the vehicle doesn't make you qualified to service the vehicle. And so I think one of the things our industry has to come to grips with is the fact that inspection and testing technicians are special. They need to be trained, and it's a great job for an aging out fitter who isn't needing to be up on a lift with heavy materials well into their 60s. And there's a good basis of understanding of systems there, and I think that's very, very helpful. But the assumption that we can effectively take some guy off a new construction or reconstruction job site and send him or her out to do inspection and testing effectively, I think is a fallacy. And I think the companies really need to come to grips with the fact that this is a separate job description with a separate culture to it, a mentality to it, an interest level for it. And when we get to that point, then I think we're going to have people who understand their need to continue learning, growing, learning from, continue reading and hearing about claim issues or problem issues so that they can be aware of current technology, current needs, current experiences, and learn from other people's mistakes. I don't think it's a sprinkler fitter's job. And I think that's one of the big changes in our industry, excuse me, has been a movement for a lot of companies away from new construction, non-recurring revenue streams into recurring revenue streams. That is, in fact, the inspection and testing world. And I think that's a dynamic shift that we've seen occur really over the last 10 and 15 years of our industry. And with that has to come this new person, this new job title, this new job description. And so I think all of this is part and parcel of getting to a professional inspector and tester who maybe never was a pipe fitter, never was a sprinkler fitter, never was a fire alarm technician. One of the things that used to frustrate me with fire alarm inspections is I'd send somebody out to do what we thought might have been a 4-hour inspection in a building, and they'd show up and they were an alarm technician, and they'd show up and there'd be ground faults or problems in the panel, and they'd spend the first hour or two trying to fix those so they could go ahead and do the test of the system. Well, honestly, that's not their job. I sent them to do, or we sent them to do this test and inspect, not to do the repair. What they should have done was call the office and said, I can't test this system today. A technician needs to come out under a different, separate work order and fix the problems in the panel so that we can then do what we were contracted to do. Instead, they would waste 2 hours or more of the inspection. And then you try to sell that back to the owner after the fact. And there's a lot of confusion. So I just think it's a job specialty. And when the industry gets to that point where it's respected and different, then I think we'll be better off. And I think your question, Eric, I think, how do we get them to continue to learn and continue to grow? I think that when it becomes a more special job title and job description, those people will have been indoctrinated to understand that this is a constant growth, constant learning, constant cycling event.
I'm going to say something kind of controversial, which I guess I always do. Anyways,
this is par for the course.
Par for the course is also the most experienced people that you have in the industry aren't necessarily the best trainers. And I think something that you've brought up, and it's come up a couple times in this discussion, is that piece of liability and the soft skills. If you're only, since I sat in, let's say I've been on the job for 30 years, and since I sat in on AFSA's updates to NFPA 25, and I go out and teach that, that's a small portion of, the technical aspect, sure, but the technical aspect of NFPA 25 is probably 25% of your job. when we start thinking about documentation, customer service, trying to stem, how do I convince the owner of the important things to get done on the work orders? I'm not saying that experienced inspectors can't be good trainers, but I am saying that not all experienced inspectors are good trainers.
That's not controversial. That's just a fact.
Yeah.
But that's one of the reasons why I continually tell our members that they should be using our training programs more so than hoping that they can clone people by putting new people with older experienced people, is that in our training programs, we emphasize all those things. You send us somebody, we send them back better, not because we taught them what's in NFPA 25. NFPA 25 is like 65, 69 pages if you don't count the annex material.
67.
Okay.
No, I'm just kidding.
So if that's all there was to training, then hand them a book and tell them to go read it.
Yeah.
I mean, I can read it to them. I could do books on tape and they could hear my ugly voice.
Please don't.
But the reality is the training programs that we present talk about all of these things. We talk about the responsibility of taking care of your tools and your test equipment, your vehicle, the appearance, the uniforms that people wear, and how to communicate and talk about, getting systems in test and making sure that they're back, in service when we leave, and all of those aspects that we talk about in our training programs. If I stick you as a rookie inspector with a legacy inspector at a company, I don't know that person's personality, their willingness to train. Do they feel threatened by some younger person who is getting book knowledge and correcting behaviors, telling their boss, hey, I don't think this is right. You should have written that up, and get something thrown at them. Oh, I don't want to hear from you. You're just a kid, kind of a mentality. So, I'm not trying to just tout AFSA's training programs, but I do think we do a much better job of that all around training and not just reading from a book. But frankly, if people would read the book, they'd be way better off. I mean, at least that's a big part of, like you say, it's about 25% of the overall job. But I agree 100% that just because, there used to be an old adage that people who can do and people who can't teach. I don't agree with that. There are people who are good at teaching and who want to share the knowledge with the next generation to make them better and make them stronger. I've always had the attitude that students should surpass the teacher's knowledge, right? They should learn what the teacher knows, but they need to learn it from a mix of people, not just from one person. We're not looking for clones. We're looking for people who can think on their feet and who can communicate well. And a big part of an inspector's job is the ability to communicate. So I don't want people staring at their own shoes when they're talking to the customer. I want them looking in the eye and explaining, and perhaps using the annex material from a 3.3.8, telling the customer, here's what our findings were, here's why they're important, here's where it is in the book, and you're going to get a quote from our company, and you really do need to get these things repaired before they become problematic. You have liability just like we do. You own the system. You have occupants in your building. We hope you never have a fire, but we have to assume you will. And that's why we're doing this ITM work.
And that's the liability portion too of the roles and responsibilities. A refresher on that. A lot of our experienced inspectors, I've noticed, toe the lines of the role, whether it be enforcement, getting super frustrated, you've got to do this, or maybe writing up the wrong things that aren't even within the scope. Just the roles and responsibilities gets to be a little bit gray.
I think
Qualified.
I think the inspector's role has to be to get certified, whether it's the NFPA certification or NICET certification or some state level test and certification. I do think it's critically important that we look at inspection and testing service folks or technicians as a professional person. I think that's just as important as a PE's influence on what design criteria should be followed when installing the system in the first place. All of those things matter. A lot of changes occur in building. A lot of packaging changes occur. A lot of product changes, storage changes. Inspectors are not responsible under NFPA 25 for those things. But if the inspector doesn't have at least some level of knowledge to be able to advise an owner, then where's the owner going to get that from? They don't get it from the annual inspections. They get from the fire department. I mean, somebody's got to keep them in the know. And I think the more an inspector does know, the better off you are. Where the line crosses of accepting liabilities for not telling them something, I'm not sure where that lies. That's a whole nother thing that the lawyers will have to figure out over the next 100 years.
Well, you two both brought up an interesting point to Josh's point, just because you've been in the industry for a long time doesn't necessarily make you a good trainer, right? But you do bring some value to the table having all of that experience. But I think there also has to be a discussion, to your point, Bob, with the people we are bringing on to be the OJT, field mentor, whatever we want to call that position, right? But I think there also has to be a discussion with those people prior to them taking on that role, not just, hey, you've been doing this for a while, we're putting the new guy with you to pick your brain. But I think there has to be a discussion here that says, hey, we're going to put the new guy with you. Are you open to training them? But also, are you open to them bringing new ideas or new feedback back to the table that's, hey,
Questions.
things have changed, right? Questions, wanting to know why you are doing what you're doing, why you're making that decision. If you're electing to write something up or not write something up, what is the logic behind that? And if they challenge that, are you okay with being challenged?
So you guys probably don't know this about me, but I have a hand course called Train the Trainer. And I don't think I'm the only one that has that. But I discussed this. When we do Train the Trainer programs, we absolutely address this with those trainers to explain their role as a trainer and to understand that they're going to get pushback and they're going to get questions and they're going to have to deal with that in a positive way so as not to end communication. You can't be the parent who says, because I said so. You can't assume that that's an answer to a question.
Doesn't work.
I guarantee it doesn't work. Ask any one of my adult children who are in this industry how many times they heard that from me and how many times they didn't care.
Yeah.
But no, the reality of that is if we're going to develop new inspectors, we also have to develop their trainers. So I think a Train the Trainer program is equally as important or significant to ensure the consistency. And consistency is critically important in training because we want maybe not clones, but we want people to understand the role. You can have different approaches to the role, but you have to understand the role and the importance of it.
How do you honor the experience and still push for that?
Well, you have to accept the fact that not everybody has the same personality. A lot of people are very good at what they do and don't want to spend any time teaching. Okay? You come across different personalities. And frankly, you can't have an instructor or a mentor who's disinterested in passing knowledge along. You have to look, there's different folks. I can't take somebody with an IQ of 50 and turn him into a surgeon. Just different folks have different skills.
Who's some of your mentors and what was their success in teaching you?
Wow. First of all, I have had a lot of great mentors in my career. Jim Lewis, who owned American Fire Sprinkler in Kansas City, whose son James now owns and runs a company. Jim was an amazing guy in terms of developing. I don't know why he saw something in me that I didn't know existed, but he took on an almost unenviable task of training me to be a better person, but also a better fire protection guy, more knowledgeable. Bill Barrett, who was our sales manager there, industry icon. His father, Phil literally grew up in the industry, was very, very influential in teaching me a lot about ethics, but about being the most knowledgeable. Don't BS your way. Know the codes, know the standards. Be the guy people go to, for answers because you are that person. Carol Garvin. I worked with Carol Garvin in California for a lot of years. I would say Jim probably taught me more about being a good human being. Errol forced me to understand more about the business aspect of business as opposed to business of fire protection. I could list clergy, fellow parishioners, in my Knights of Columbus experience. There's a lot of people. I wouldn't say that I've only had mentors who've influenced me. Josh, I would say, you and Eric have influenced me greatly in these past 4 and 5 years working together. I don't think there's anybody I've ever worked with that I haven't gotten something from. I am a I'd like to think I'm a good teacher, but I am a perpetual learner. And I spend a lot of time thinking about especially things that go badly. I'm one of these guys, if there's 30 people in a class and 29 of them gave me a decent evaluation and one didn't, then I only focus on the one. It's a horrible thing because you'd think, hey, I can't please everybody. But from an education perspective, I'm disappointed in myself if I can't be effective in training others. It's a gift that I've been given from those mentors and those people I've had the privilege of working with and for, and something that I try to share, very honestly. It's really important to me. So I appreciate that question. I can tell you that that I'm very, very appreciative. Wouldn't be where I am today if I didn't have those folks influencing me. But I'll also take a little bit of credit, and I'll credit my grandparents as much as anybody for the fact that I take responsibility to be a person who's doing my job, who shows up and is interested. And I think this is an awesome industry. I love what we do. The fact that we save lives and property is not a bumper sticker. It's a fact, and what we do matters. And I've always appreciated being a career where what you do makes a difference in the world.
I think we've concentrated a bunch on the experienced person, and you talked about a little bit of a generational gap, and I think our generation, Eric, is probably started this trend. But what you're noticing with the younger people coming in, since there's so much information at their disposal, and they recognize experience, and they recognize, I remember the first time that we got to teach them, Bob Caputo's coming in, right? There's a lot of knowledge. There's a big base. You want to impress that. Sometimes you're afraid to ask the why because you don't want that experienced person who's kind of sought after within the organization or the industry to have a negative connotation. And we've got to change that. Ruffling feathers with good intent is okay.
So I'll start by saying I don't see myself in the way that you saw me. I don't see myself as, oh my God, I'm going to teach with Bob Caputo. I don't think that should matter. But what I will say is the youth of America doesn't learn the same way I learned when I was young, a long time ago. There were still dinosaurs roaming the planet, of course. But the reality is if your goal is to be an effective teacher and not seek legacy like, oh my God, Bob Caputo, or oh my God, Russ Levitt, or, pick a name, Bill Koffel, all great instructors, all effective. We've touched a lot of people, and it's an honor, literally an honor, to be not only thought of that way. That's not the issue. For me, the issue is to have been effective, to pass along knowledge and to create enthusiasm with that next generation of practitioners in our industry. That's the cool thing, is to know that you have actually had an impact in a positive way. But if you want to be an effective trainer, which is my goal, then you have to teach people in the way that they receive knowledge. And today's youth don't receive knowledge in the same way. And so listening to them and making sure, I tell lots of people, when I leave this seminar, whether it's 8 hours or 5 days, I am still going to know everything I knew when I got here. What are you going to leave with? What are you going to know? The more questions you ask and the more challenging you are to me, the more you will draw from me. And the less it's about putting up slides and PowerPoint presentations and reading from slides or looking at pictures or all that's BS. All that is not how you learn. Our industry, any industry, needs to stay ahead of making sure that those, and I'm hesitant to call them students. I prefer to call them participants. I'm still a student. I'm still learning every single day. Technology, codes and standards, full-scale fire testing, new products. It's ever changing. One of the things I love about this industry is it's never been boring. Never. And it's never going to be.
Well, one of the things that I want to say to potentially those newer inspectors out there who maybe are more afraid to ask those questions is that when I transitioned into starting to teach instead of being on the learning end, when I started to transition into a teaching role, and that's been a slow transition over the career, as it is with a lot of people, right? As you gain that knowledge, it's, oh, hey, you start training this person, you start to develop that skill. I realized that as a trainer, it was the questions that got brought up from the people that I was teaching, where they would ask a question and it's, oh, I didn't understand that, or I couldn't explain that well enough. Maybe my understanding of that topic or of that thing wasn't as strong as I thought it was, right? So starting to teach also showed me where my knowledge gaps were and where I needed to go get more education. But one of the things that I enjoy about all of our classes that come through is at least once a class, somebody asks me a question that challenges me, right? And it's not, Eric has all of the information. I'm sure y'all have had similar situations where it's just like, oh, I had never thought of that situation. Or I didn't consider that. So what might seem like a silly or rudimentary question, sometimes it's the, oh, I hadn't even considered that. Like, that's a good thing that you brought up. And then we all learn more together. But I would encourage the people that are newer to kind of, as you say, not get intimidated by the instructor, because most of us don't see ourselves as these amazing, untouchable people. We're just people.
You know what's
we
funny?
Love to share the information, but
I don't mean funny, but what's interesting about what you just said, Eric, is I look at NFPA codes and standards. They're absolutely perfectly written, clearly understandable, with no opportunity to misunderstand anything until two people read it. And then there's these misunderstandings of, well, I think it means this. No, I think it means that. And so I don't know if you guys know this. You probably do, but I did informal interpretations for NFPA for 5 or 6 years. And it would always amaze me how I'd get 2 phone calls, one from the person arguing the left side and one from the person arguing the right side of the exact same section, if you will, of the code or standard. And teaching is exactly, the same way. If the teacher stops learning and gets off rests on that plateau, rests on that stair landing and stops climbing, they will render themselves inefficient, undesirable, and over the bell curve, stale. Time to move on, time to go retire. Also, I think an educator has to be part entertainer, part educator. If you're just monotone, drone, and boring, no one's listening. So and I'm not suggesting you have to tell a few jokes. I'll tell you this. Russ Levitt and I have been teaching partners for a very long time, 30 years or more. And Russ and I don't have the same style. But we've shared each other's stories so much so that I can't remember which ones were his and which ones were mine. And I'm talking about actual life experiences. But the same thing goes for anybody. There's a lot of style issues. Matt Klaus, when he was at NFPA, used to say, if I have a room full of engineers, I'm sending Bill Koffel. If I have a room full of contractors, I'm sending Bob Caputo. And I think just him saying that opened my eyes to the fact that, not everybody's cup of tea. You have to know the audience. And so I would encourage instructors to understand who their students are. If we're getting a room full of inspectors versus a room full of designers or a room full of engineers or a mix, you have to change the presentation to communicate to the middle third of the audience, because you can't tailor to the bottom third or the top third. You have to communicate to everybody. You have to make eye contact and make sure you understand that they're understanding and encourage those kind of questions. And what's cool about your scenario, Eric, is when somebody asks me a question I don't know the answer to, which is pretty much every day, how am I going to find the answer? Let's do this together. How do I use the index? What's the verb? What's the noun? How do I use the index or the table of contents? Am I in the right book? How do I find this answer and collect together? Show, I mean, that's one thing I think most instructors mistake in the early part of their career as a trainer. They think they have to know all the answers. I think it's best to be vulnerable and say, you know what, I don't know the answer to that, but I know where to find it. Let's do that together. Yeah. I think that's a good part of training.
I think I've always had more respect for the instructors that have been able to say, you know what, I don't have that answer. I will find an answer. I will get back to you.
Yeah.
Right. But I don't have it right now, or I'm not sure of the answer, and I don't want to tell you something wrong, because I think there are some people out there that panic in that situation.
Make something up,
or they'll get
shrug it off
away there, shrug it off and ignore it. There's a few different ways. I always had the most respect for the people that were completely honest and said, you know what, that's a great question. I don't have an answer right now.
Yeah, you lose credibility with the class if you don't know the answer. Just say you don't know the answer. I mean, that's a hard lesson to learn when you're a young instructor, when you feel like, oh my God, now I'm on the stage, I have to know everything.
And this conversation, too, I think is not just for the instructors teaching this stuff every day, but for the on-the-job training. There's a few traps that I noticed early in my career that was easy to. That was one, right? You feel like you have to be the one that knows all of the answers to 375 books. It's crazy. But the other trap is to be so structured and not be afraid to go off base. Like, you come to our 2-day courses, and yes, we have learning objectives, but not every course looks the same or feels the same. Okay. And let's say you're in the field, and my goal with Eric today is to go over main drain testing, but he asks me a question on the pre-action system. It's really easy to get into your training mindset. We're not talking about that now. Don't feed that information. No, have those discussions, even if it's not what you think the time frame is, because you're not the one learning. Yeah. And if you don't get my concept, that's not a you problem. That's a me as an instructor problem, right? Whether lack of knowledge or the way that I portrayed that. Training people super important and not easy. It's psychological.
It's a privilege,
sure,
to be in the front of the room, and it's a big responsibility, because you are imprinting on other people. They're going to walk away knowing what you told them was gospel truth, and they have to depend on that. And it is a huge responsibility. But if not us, then who, right? Who's more passionate or more knowledgeable than those of us that are either sitting on committees or doing this training on a regular basis?
It was significantly more difficult than I had ever anticipated when I first started training. And it still feels that way some days currently, right? Sure, you theoretically know the information, but taking that theoretical understanding and being able to break it down into a way that is digestible for other people, because unfortunately we don't all process information the same way, going back to our earlier conversation. But I know sometimes that Josh and I will be cycling through a class, and one of us will give an explanation on a topic that the other one's already talked about, but explain it just ever so slightly differently. And then it finally clicks in that just slight change in approach, slight change in verbiage. Maybe they had a different analogy, whatever the case is, right? And all of a sudden that concept clicks, and it's like, oh, okay, I'm going to keep that in the back of my mind for future if we come into that same thing. But it's like sometimes just the figuring out how to portray that information in a way that connects with people is a lot more challenging than I had ever initially given it credit to. So if you're on the fence about training, I highly recommend stepping into that on-the-job training role, being open to feedback. It's going to show you a lot of where you potentially have knowledge gaps, but it's also going to challenge you as an inspector, as a trainer, as a person, right? To figure out, okay, how do I portray this information? How do we answer these questions?
You know, Eric, I'm going to tell you, I hate admitting this, but I will bet you I've probably done more than 1,000 seminars in my career. I have never started a seminar that I didn't have a nervous stomach walking in the room, ever, even today. But once you get into that rhythm and realize that your strengths, I think my strength is to take the ability to take very complex information and express it in a most simple way that anybody can understand it. I used to joke that if you can make 8th graders understand everything, then you're probably hitting the nail on the head where you need to be. I love what we do. And by the way, for the record, you two are two of the best instructors I know. I don't think anybody comes through our programs and walks away thinking, oh, I wish the instructor might have been a little better. You guys are awesome at what you do. But our whole staff, Kevin, John, everybody, Matt and Vicky, Matt's one of the better instructors I've ever worked with as well. The reality is this industry has a lot to offer. But if we don't continue to grow and learn, and it gets back to what I said about training trainers, we have to make sure that there's consistency. I don't recommend going to McDonald's for lunch, but if you do go there and order a Big Mac anywhere in the world, it's the same sandwich. I guess what I'm saying is people should come to these things and get the same message, whether it's our training or somebody else, some other organization. What we do is too important for it to be fragmented or, oh, I got a different message when I went to, NFSA's training program. It was completely different. Shouldn't be that way.
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up, though, because I feel like that should be our goal as an industry with inspection, testing, and maintenance as well. It shouldn't matter what technician or what company comes. It should be a very consistent. Obviously, there's going to be some soft skills, but you can't catch everything. As hard as you try, you're going to miss something. Hopefully, you only miss the minor things, but it should be very consistent. There shouldn't be a huge gap between, oh, well, this company gave me a night and day different report than this other company when they walked through the same building. We should be striving for that same consistency on the inspection, testing, and maintenance side with fairly minor.
Is that why we call it a standard?
Changes. Yes.
Do you think that current continuing education requirements are sufficient?
I actually do not. I wish things were more stringent.
Mm-hmm.
I think that the need for CEUs or the need for continuing education overall is critical to the success. I don't want to see, we don't want to find consistency or we don't want to find the lowest common denominator. We want to keep the expectations at a very high level. Fire sprinklers are the solution. You've heard me say it 1,000 times, I think, when seconds count, first responders are minutes away. We have to protect people in the built environment, and fire sprinkler systems are the best way to do that, whether it's single-family residential or high-rise buildings and hospitals. Fire sprinklers are the solution to minimizing losses as a result of fire, whether they're loss of life or loss of property. These systems are important. I've had politicians ask me, well, why aren't you here talking to us about vehicular incidents or alcohol-related vehicular incidents? They kill a lot more people than fires. Well, that's not my field of endeavor. I can tell people to wear seatbelts and don't drink and drive all day long. We're in the fire and life safety business.
I think there's also a personal issue with CEUs, and I've been there. Oh crap, it's time to renew. I need to go get those. And you're more seeking out the quick hitters, even if they're repetitive, that are free, versus actually utilizing it as true continuing education of, oh crap, I'm weak. You know, that pre-action system is a pain in the butt. I don't know enough about alarms. Go find an alarm one, or fire doors. Run into these all the time. And that's something individually you got to work on.
Yeah. So one of the things I recently heard that California used to require 30 CEUs for 3 years, and now they're going to change that to a 10 CEUs per year. And I think to solve the problem you're talking about, which is don't wait until 2 years and 11 months to realize, oh my gosh, I need 30 CEUs. Where do I get those? What are online programs where I'm literally just cycling time instead of knowledge? Those are folks that are going through their daily routines. You know, days become weeks, weeks become months, months become years, and they're just recycling things and not advancing their own career, their own professional development by attending. You know, I'm still attending seminars that others are preaching. I go to the NFPA, C&E, and I attend seminars. I have stuff I need to learn. Plus, I pick up teaching tips from others and all of that. So I'm not claiming, hey, perfection, look at me. But what I am claiming is that, you know, professionals are in our industry need to be voracious learners and never stop doing that. Kind of the theme of what we've been talking about here.
Josh, to your point, like it is important to challenge yourself on gaining the new education and realizing where your weaknesses are versus hitting the same repetitive, hey, I know it's going to get me quick CEUs. I don't really have to pay attention. Going and getting that challenge. But the other challenge is we need to be advocating on the personal side, going to our company saying, hey, I need time to go get this training. And then on the company side, we need to make sure that we're providing those opportunities for our employees to go get those trainings. And that might not be something where it's going to be right in our backyard. That there's a potential they may have to travel somewhere to get the particular training that they need. Getting that training helps everybody because it helps build that skill set. It helps build the knowledge and limit the liability and do all of the things. But I feel like that is one of the other big challenges that our industry faces is we're so afraid to pull the people out of the field because that's making our revenue stream. That's helping us hit our numbers. But without hitting the CEUs and growing the knowledge base and the skill base, we're holding ourselves back or our people back from developing into better inspectors. So I think that's another balancing act that we probably need to address as an industry. And I don't know what the best approach there is, but.
Well, I think you hit on something really important. I think there's no university out there that doesn't offer distance learning opportunities now. And frankly, I was a distance learner. A lot of my college credits came through distance learning from a variety of different schools. I think COVID taught us that we don't have to show up in person for every meeting or everything, that we can do Zoom or Teams calls and things of that nature. So, I've been an NFPA instructor for a long time, and during COVID, instead of sending me overseas, although they did that on a few occasions, more importantly, they would have me teach some of the coursework virtual. So I'd be here in the States, and folks would be on the other end seeing me on a computer screen. That was a really difficult transition for me because I'm used to being in the room, seeing people's reactions, seeing who's paying attention. If I see somebody nodding off in the afternoon, I go stand next to them and talk a little louder and get them back to focus. It's difficult for people who aren't used to being in a classroom all day, listening to somebody on, let's just face it, I mean, codes and standards aren't the most exciting thing to keep you awake. You're not going to a movie theater on a Friday night to watch somebody talk about codes and standards. You need a little more action. You should, yeah. Of course. But
we'll probably be there.
Let's just say if you need a good nap on a Sunday afternoon, watching golf in slow motion or reading codes and standards will probably get you there. But the reality was, it was a transition for me to figure out how to keep people engaged when teaching a subject matter virtually. And I also think that's a big part of our future. You talked about, pulling people offline and getting them to travel. Well, for us, I encourage a lot of our members to say, hey, we can send you one instructor to be at your facility for 2 days teaching your people or presenting material to your people, as opposed to you sending them 30 of them here and paying 30 travel expenses and hotels and meals and all that. So we do need to be available, portable, and use all the tools in the toolbox, including virtual training. And that's one of those things that I think a person who's comfortable doing live training, it's tough to stand in a room in front of a computer. And so what I try to do is I try to stand up in the office in front of that camera and imagining that I'm standing in front of a room full of people, because I'm just doing it on a screen. But tough to do that. So interesting that you would bring that piece up, because it does conjure some thoughts of how much I dislike doing virtual training.
we have these discussions too about training. I mean, this is a second or third time that you've been on this podcast, and we've talked about training in general. But to see the importance of this topic, I think if we look at the codes and standards specifically, we look at qualified personnel from when I started in the industry, from when you started. This is a discussion every single code cycle, right? And we look at 25, it's a competent and capable individual having met the requirements for training in a given field acceptable to the HJ. And if you pull up the annex, I'm sure that we've seen changes. So industry-wide, yeah, another pointer. Fantastic. I think it might be in chapter 4. Industry-wide, this is a discussion every single committee meeting.
Right. Well, it's not only an interesting topic, who's qualified, what makes you qualified, but there's other shifts in our industry as well. You know, back when I got into the code making process, the manufacturers and suppliers didn't have seats on committees, and now they do. And so I can get CEUs from the manufacturers and suppliers who don't charge for that, because they're knowledgeable and they have new technology and new products. And, you know, when I came into the industry, there weren't that many kinds of sprinklers. There were uprights and pendants and sidewalls.
Perforated pipe.
And, well, not quite perforated pipe. But you know why they call them fire plugs. But the reality was the number and types of sprinklers that we have available to us today are vastly greater. And it's tough for a designer. You know, we've been focusing a lot of our attention today in this discussion on inspection and testing. But for a designer to keep pace with the opportunities to use different technology, different types of sprinklers, whether CMSA, CMDA. You know, when I came into this industry, the gold standard was a standard spray sprinkler. And today, you know, that's just not the case anymore. If you're doing a design of any kind of a distribution center or warehousing or whatever, you're going to have to look at a variety of manufacturers to find the best application based on the height and the commodity and all of those things. It's tough to stay ahead of all of the data that's out there, because it is so rapidly changing and fast moving. So you know, even though we focused a lot on inspection and testing in this conversation today, it's a daunting task to stay ahead of technology here.
So to wrap,
you mentioned the designer part though, but I feel like that is one of the discussions that we have a lot with designers, is you get fairly comfortable using a certain suite of products, because that's, you know, usually last what took you to dinner, or what spec, right? But that's not the best application for every situation. So half of the challenge is just staying up with the new technology, because the rate of new technology coming out is, at least it feels like it's intensified significantly over the last
certainly
couple decades.
Faster than the codes can keep up within 3-year code cycles.
Right. So now we're starting to design to things that we don't have a good full picture of yet, and different manufacturers are coming out with different products all the time. So half the challenge there is just staying up with what's available.
Well, the cool thing there is, you know, we're limited on I almost said the word storage. I didn't mean that. We're limited on testing because we're limited on the facilities and how tall are the test facilities that you can do full scale testing. Cool thing is, I think with the data points that are known, AI is going to help our industry in the future to develop without having to build a 200-foot tall test facility. I'm being facetious, but the reality is, I do think AI will be beneficial, not just in medical exploration, things of that nature, but I do think it'll be helpful in predicting more than just fire modeling programs that we see today, and we'll have better solutions, maybe more cost-effective solutions. We're looking at a big influence right now of data storage, the data facilities, and the amount of electricity and energy needed for all of that. And that's a big change for us, because I don't think we really know how to protect that stuff yet. And I think there's more of a fire suppression need with these batteries than a fire control issue with cooling those batteries. And I've said it to you guys before. I think water mist is going to become a lot more pervasive in maybe those types of facilities in the future. We might see that technology being a better solution in the fire suppression thought process. I do think AI, those are the kind of things I'm looking forward to maybe still being around to see AI's influence on our industry.
Wrap this up. I've got two questions. One's fairly detailed. The other one's a quick lob to wrap it up. One is, what role should AFSA play in setting or raising this technical bar nationally or internationally, really?
So long and short answer is AFSA is the industry leader in training and education. We've far and away surpassed, in my opinion, any other group in that arena. I think it's imperative that we continue to look at things in multiple languages, doing our training programs, providing our book material and so on in Spanish language as well as English language, which is becoming more pervasive in the construction world, has been for a long time. I think we're a little late in getting to that point. We are reaching out to Central and South America in conjunction with IFSA and some others. So I think our role is important. It's critical. It's becoming more global with the support of our board of directors and our staff. So to your point, I think we play an absolute critical role in training and education, as much or more so than any other organization.
We've adjusted our training for this specific thing too, with a legacy trainer type program, which kind of merges some of our other stuff, but keeps up with that. So that's been exciting as well.
Absolutely.
Then the last lob question to put the bow tie on this thing is, if you were an inspection, testing, and maintenance tool in the back of an inspector's truck, what would you be and why?
That's a really great question. It depends on what I was inspecting and testing, and Eric's the bow tie wearer, not me.
Fair enough, not the episode. I won't make that mistake again.
I would probably be an iPad.
Okay.
Because
it's not the answer I thought you were going to give.
Well, the reason I would be an iPad is because a lot of electronic inspections make things more palatable. I don't have to worry about trying to read somebody's handwriting. There's good checklists, so I don't miss things. And plus, I can take pictures with it of things that describe the deficiency or defect, or the impact, whatever it is I'm trying to portray to the owner. Picture's worth 1,000 words. So the ability to do inspections, but not only that, I've got all the codes and standards from NFPA available to me on link. So with an iPad, I have almost all the other tools that I need, without, of course, flow test equipment or things of that nature. But it's the most versatile tool in my vehicle, because I have the codes and standards, and I can keep my time on that. If I'm participating in a webinar or seminar from afar, I can do that on that iPad. And of course, any tablet. I'm just using iPad as an example because Apple is paying me for the plug. Back to the original comment.
Yeah. Ford and Apple, if you're watching.
Yeah.
Right. So for that reason, I would pick, a tablet for that reason, for the versatility and availability of codes and standards without having to carry books and without having to carry a camera and all those other things. I would pick that. If you're looking for a physical tool, man, that's tough. I would, I chair 24 and 291, so I do a lot of water flow testing. So, I think, pitot tubes, hose monsters, hoses, things of that nature, used to flow water and verify the availability. I mean, hey, we're talking about water-based fire protection systems. You have to have water. You have to verify the water's there for the duration at the pressure you need. So, but I would still go back to the iPad to put in all the information.
Quick speed round. What would you be?
Calibrated gauge.
You're a nerd, dude.
No, but part of the problem that we run into is we are making very large decisions, very costly decisions for our owners.
Based on the accuracy.
Yeah, based on the accuracy of the testing we're doing, whether it's the accuracy of the main drain test to evaluate the water supply, whether it's the accuracy of our fire pump testing, just generalized decisions on whether this system is adequate or not. And we're asking the owner to spend potentially a very large sum of money. And if we're making these big decisions off of bad, inaccurate data because we didn't take the time to make sure our gauge was calibrated and we got a good reading, right? Like that just, it irritates me that we're making these giant decisions off of questionable data. So I'd be a calibrated gauge because I want to try to drive us into more informed, educated decisions and the knowledge behind why those are important and what that leads to.
And keep your ear out.
How do you put a bow tie on a gauge?
We'll figure it out. Teflon bow tie. We have an episode coming. We're actually recording it tomorrow with somebody whose job prior to getting to fire protection was calibration and accuracy. So super excited. So keep your ear out for that. I'm going to make it light. I would be a tachometer because I go from 0 to 100 real quick, but not as in depth or nerdy. Really appreciate you being on. Appreciate our listeners. We are on YouTube now. Really excited to see where that goes with Andrew involved. Our things are going to look different, feel different, and it's going to be good. So appreciate it. Like and subscribe. Let us know what you want to listen to, and we'll catch you on the next one. This has been the K Factor Podcast. If you enjoyed the show, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share wherever you tune in to podcasts, or head over to our website for more. Reach out to us anytime at technical@firesprinkler.org. Stay safe and always learn as we keep the fire protection conversation going.